Unit 3 Knowledge Generation, Historical Perspective I1. Structure. 3.1 Introduction. 3.2 Objectives. 3.3 Positivistic Paradigm. 3.3.1 Aspects of Positivistic Paradigm. Paradigm 3. Unit 3 Knowledge Generation, Historical Perspective I1. Structure. 3.1 Introduction. 3.2 Objectives. 3.3 Positivistic Paradigm. 3.3.1 Aspects of Positivistic Paradigm. 3.3.2 Limitation of the Positivistic Paradigm. 3.3.3 Alternative Approaches to Development of Social Science Inquiry. 3.4 Emergence of Field Methods. 3.4.1 Case Study Method. 3.4.2 Projective Techniques. 3.4.3 Anecdotal Records. 3.5 Review Rethinking of Concepts and Constructs. 3.5.1 Objectivity. 3.5.2 Generalization. 3.5.3 Nature of Reality. 3.6 Varied Studies in Education. 3.6.1 Relationship Studies. 3.6.2 Developmental Studies. 3.6.3 Understanding Studies. 3.7 Studies in Education, Combination of Perspectives. 3.8 Let us sum up. 3.9 Unit End Activities. 3.10 Points for discussion. 3.11 Suggested readings. 3.12 Answers to check your progress. 3.1 Introduction. In Unit 2, the earlier phase of knowledge generation process has been presented in a historical perspective. The later phase of this process will be dealt with in this unit. Knowledge generation through the scientific approach had a powerful impact on viewing the natural environment and improving the conditions of social life. Consequently, newer fields of study started coming up. Anecdotal records and projective techniques originated within the framework of scientific approach vis-a-vis this positivistic paradigm. In course of time, non-positivistic paradigm was becoming gradually more visible in social sciences and humanities in terms of meaning and interpretation of verbal behavior, phenomenology, etc. This paradigm made many concepts and constructs, namely, objectivity, generalization, status of knowledge, nature of reality, etc. look suspect. Education, having both the perspectives, cannot but recognize the emergence of such trends. Activities, processes, structures and phenomena in education, which is a very diverse field, got evolved through time. That is why educational scenario changes from time to time. Quite reasonable, therefore, that the studies visualized in education can be of varied kinds, like relationships, developmental and understanding, rather than explanation and prediction. These studies in education can be conducted meaningfully by utilizing varied perspectives. Knowledge generation. Historical perspective I1. Of research. In an action situation, even a combination of paradigms may be relevant sometimes. This is what constitutes the content of this unit. I 3.2 Objectives discuss the meaning and the limitations of the positivistic paradigm, i.e. scientific approach. Describe the new developments in social sciences and in education in terms of emergence of new areas of study, new concepts, constructs and new paradigm. Understand the non-positivistic paradigm, e.g. phenomenological approach. Appreciate that education has both the positivistic and phenomenological perspectives. Understand that studies in education can be varied, e.g. relationship, developmental and understanding type. Realize that research in education may need to combine varied paradigms. 3.3 Positivistic paradigm. In order to explicate positivistic paradigm, we have first to understand what a paradigm is. This term was introduced in 1962 by Thomas Kuhn in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. The concept has turned out to be useful in inspiring critical thinking about sciences and the way shifts in basic scientific thinking occur. A paradigm determines the criteria according to which one selects and defines problems for inquiry. A paradigm determines scientific approaches and procedures which stand out as exemplary to a new generation of scientists as long as they do not oppose it. Kuhn characterizes a paradigm as an integrated cluster of substantive concepts, variables and problems attached with corresponding methodological approaches and tools. A paradigm gathers into itself a community of investigators. By sharing information within itself, this community gives itself intellectual and social support. It tends not to communicate with investigators who follow different paradigms. Citation of others' work is frequent within a paradigm but much less frequent, perhaps non-existent across paradigms. Hence, the followers of a paradigm tend to have their own journals, scientific societies, and meetings, because the paradigm has sworn their allegiance to an integrated set of concepts, variables, problems, and methods. A revolution in the world of scientific paradigms occurs when one or several researchers at a given time encounter anomalies, for instance, M&A observations, which in a striking way do not fit the prevailing paradigm. Such anomalies can give rise to a crisis after which the universe under study is perceived in an entirely new light. PR. Whereas theories and facts become subject to thorough rethinking and re-evaluation. Positivistic paradigm of knowledge generation is based on the philosophical ideas of the French philosopher, Auguste Comte, who turned to observation and reason as means of understanding behavior. More simply, explanation proceeded by way of scientific description. It was Comte who consciously invented the new science of society and gave it the name sociology. He thought that it would be possible to establish it on a positive basis, just like the other sciences, which send its necessary preliminaries to it. For social phenomena were to be viewed in the light of physiological or biological laws and theories and investigated empirically, just like physical phenomena. Likewise, biological phenomena were to be viewed in the light of chemical laws and theories. And so on down the line. 35 Perspective or knowledge cut's position was to lead to a general doctrine of positivism which held that DL. Genuine knowledge is based on sense experience and can only be advanced by means of observation and experiment. Following in the empiricist tradition, it limited inquiry and belief to what can be firmly established and in thus abandoning metaphysical and speculative attempts to gain knowledge by reason alone. Positivist paradigm developed what has been described as a tough-minded orientation to facts and natural phenomena. I 3.3.1 Aspects of positivistic paradigm. Positivistic paradigm has been defined in the last section, but its special features need to be explained. This is what follows. I difficulty in precise meaning. Not only Comte but also many other scholars such as Bacon, Mill, Hume as well as the scholars of Vienna Circle contributed to the development of the concept of positivistic paradigm. It is, therefore, difficult to assign it a very precise and consistent meaning. The term has also been applied to the doctrine of a school of philosophy known as logical positivism, originated by the scholars of Vienna Circle. Logical positivists hold that the meaning of a statement is, or is given by the method of its verification. Unverifiable statements are, therefore, meaningless. Assumptions behind positivistic paradigm. Positivism derives its meaning from an acceptance of natural science as the paradigm of human knowledge. This has led to the development of the scientific method as a means of knowledge generation. Positivistic paradigm has, therefore, to be understood within the total framework of the principles and assumptions of science. First, there is the assumption of determinism, according to which events have causes and are determined by other circumstances. These causal links can eventually be uncovered and understood, and that the events are explicable in terms of their antecedents. The universe does not behave capriciously. It is the ultimate aim of the scientists to formulate laws to account for the happenings in the world around them, obtaining thereby a firm basis for prediction and control. The second assumption is that of empiricism, which holds that certain kinds of reliable knowledge can only originate in experience, which scientifically means that acceptance of a theory or hypothesis depends on the nature of empirical evidence for its support. Empirical here means that which is verifiable by observation. The viewpoint on empiricism may be summed up by saying that the best way to acquire reliable knowledge is the way of evidence obtained by direct experience. Thus, in an empirical science, the scientist first gathers data on the basis of experience, then he classifies or, if possible, quantifies data, tries to discover relationship in the classified and quantified data, and ultimately by gradual approximation he reaches the truth. The basic idea behind which is that phenomena should always be explained in the most economical way possible. The fourth assumption is that of generality, which forms the essential aspect of both the deductive and inductive methods of reasoning. Indeed, Historically speaking, it was the problematic relationship between the concrete particular and the abstract general that resulted in two competing theories of knowledge, the rational and the empirical. Beginning with observations of the particular, scientists set out to generalize their findings to the world at large. This is so because they are concerned ultimately with explanation. Of course, the concept of generality presents much less of a problem to natural scientists working chiefly with inanimate matter than to human scientists who, of necessity having to deal with samples of larger human populations, have to exercise great caution when generalizing their findings to the particular parent populations. Having identified the basic assumptions of science, we come to the core question, knowledge generation. What is science? Science may be broadly defined as a way of comprehending the historical perspective of one world, as a means of explanation and understanding, of prediction and control. Science is based on certain beliefs and assumptions which are briefly stated as under. All events in nature are, at least to a degree, lawful and ordered, predictable and regular. This order, predictability and regularity of nature can be discovered through the activities of the scientific method. ETNLTHs can ultimately be derived only from observation. Science does not depend upon authority as a source of truth but relies upon empirical observation. Thus the phenomena that can actually be observed to exist are within the domain of the scientific method. The ultimate goal of science is to integrate and systematize findings into a meaningful pattern or theory which is regarded as tentative and not the ultimate TMTH. Theory is subject to revision or modification as new evidence is found. Knowledge generation under positivistic paradigm. Positivistic paradigm has systematized the knowledge generation process, which proceeds as the development of a science, an area or a set of phenomena is brought under study or close scrutiny. Then the relevant factors and variables are identified. Research or study correlates the variables and parameters which may be found to be related to one another. Information about the phenomena under study is systematically integrated as theories begin to develop. If needed, the researcher may move from correlation to causality through systematic and controlled manipulation of variables experimentation. This leads to establishment of a body of knowledge theory as the outcome of the study. Depending on the nature of the phenomena under scrutiny, laws may be formulated and systematized. Ultimately, the established body of knowledge is used, according to necessity, in the resolution of problems or as a source of further inquiry. 3.3.2 Limitations of the positivistic paradigm. In spite of the scientific enterprise's proven success, especially in the field of natural sciences, its ontological theory of being or of existence and epistemological theory of knowledge bases have been the focus of sustained and sometimes vehement criticism. Beginning in the second half of the 19th century, the limitations of the positivistic paradigm were pointed out by the best intellectuals in Europe, that is, philosophers, scientists, social critics and creative artists. And even today opponents of positivism are made up of a similar cross-section, including many from within the ranks of the social scientists themselves. Essentially, it has been a reaction against the world picture projected by the positivistic paradigm which, it is contended, devalues life and mind. The fundamental limitation of the positivistic paradigm is that it reflects a mechanistic and reductionist view of nature which, by definition, excludes notions of choice, freedom, individuality, and moral responsibility. To quote a critique, the positivistic paradigm or for that matter the mechanistic science eliminates the concept of life itself. All they can do is to define life in terms of biochemistry, biophysics, vibrations, wavelengths, and so on. They reduce life to conceivable measurement, but such a conception of life does not embrace the most evident element of all, that life can only be known by a living being, by inner experience. No matter how exact measurement may be, it can never give us an experience of life, for life cannot be weighed and measured on a physical scale. The Danish philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, the proponent of existentialism, also pointed out the limitations of the positivistic paradigm. Kierkegaard was concerned with individuals and their need to fulfill themselves to the highest level of development. This realization of a person's potential was for him the meaning of existence. but the perspective of knowledge characteristic features of the age, that is, democracy's trust in the crowd mentality. The ascendancy of reason, scientific and technological progress, all militate against the achievement of this end and contribute to the dehumanization of the individual. Kierkegaard was convinced that people suffer from the illusion of objectivity, which is one of the main masks of the positivistic paradigm. He wished to free people from this illusion. By objectivity, he meant the imposition of rules of behavior and thought and the making of a person into an observer who is set on discovering general laws, governing human behavior. The capacity for subjectivity, he argued, should be regained. He regarded subjectivity as the ability to consider one's own relationship to whatever constitutes the focus of inquiry. The justification for any intellectual activity lies in the effect it has on increasing our awareness and degree of consciousness. This increase, some critics claim, has been retarded in our time by the excessive influence the positivistic paradigm has been allowed to exert on areas of our intellectual life. Thus, the positivistic paradigm demands that nothing must be regarded as real which cannot be founded by empirical science and rational methods, by objectivity. Since the whole problem belongs to psychic reality, to man's inner world, to his moral being, and to the subjective life, there can be no debate unless we are prepared to recognize the serious limitations of positivistic paradigm and the failure of strict adherence to objectivity to give an adequate account of existence. The theoretical perspective with which the positivistic paradigm has dominated the social science scene seeks the facts or causes of social phenomena with little regard for the subjective states of individuals. The positivist considers social facts or social phenomena as things that exercise an external and coercive influence on human behavior. The positivist searches for facts and causes through methods such as survey, questionnaires, inventories and demographic analysis which produce quantitative data, and which allow him to statistically prove relationships between operationally defined variables. The positivist is not interested in the subjective nature of human behavior and therefore reduces people to statistical aggregates. And these are no less serious limitations. Many critics of the positivistic paradigm question the perspective adopted by positivist social science because it presents a misleading picture of the human being. This biased and restricted image of humans comes about because the social scientists wedded to positivism concentrate on the repetitive, predictable and invariant aspects of the person, on visible externalities, to the exclusion of the subjective world. Another limitation of the positivistic paradigm is that it fails to take account of our unique ability, as human beings, to interpret our experiences and represent them to ourselves. We can, and do construct theories about ourselves and our world. Moreover, we act on these theories. In failing to recognize this, positivism is said to ignore the world in which the meanings are developed by active subjects through their life experiences. The findings of positivistic social science are often said to be of little consequence to those for whom they are intended, namely, teachers, social workers, counselors, personnel managers, and the like. The more effort, it seems, the researchers put into their scientific experimentation in the laboratory by restricting, simplifying and controlling variables, the more likely they are to end up with a pruned, synthetic and constructed version of the whole social reality. The limitations mentioned above are quite serious. But what alternatives have been shaped out to cope with these limitations? This is what is going to be outlined next. 3.3.3 Alternative approaches to development of social science inquiry. The perspective of the researcher to view reality and visualize appropriate modes of inquiry through which it can be observed, studied and understood, is heavily dependent on the ideological position one holds about these basic concepts and processes. This knowledge generation. Historical perspective 11. Factors at the root of the evolution of different methods of research and methodological emphases. The anti-positivist movement in different disciplines of the social sciences is represented by three schools of thought: phenomenology, ethnomethodology and symbolic interactionism. A common thread running through the three schools is a concern with phenomena, that is, the things we directly apprehend through our senses as we go about our daily lives, together with a consequent emphasis on qualitative as opposed to quantitative methodology. Phenomenology in its broadest meaning. Phenomenology is a theoretical point of view that advocates the study of direct experience taken at face value. It sees behavior is determined by the phenomena of experience rather than by external, objective and physically described reality. A. Husserl and A. Schachts are the main proponents of this school of thought. The distinguishing features of this viewpoint are a belief in the importance and in the primacy of subjective consciousness, an understanding of consciousness as active, as meaning-bestowing, a claim that there are certain essential structures to consciousness of which we gain direct knowledge by a certain kind of reflection. Exactly what these structures are is a point about which phenomenologists differ. The phenomenologists believe that any phenomenon obtains because it is experienced. The experience provides meaningfulness to the phenomenon. The experience of individuals involved is, thus, an essential and integral part of the phenomenon. It is for this reason that the social phenomena, education included, unlike natural phenomena, have an important coordinate in human experience. The inclusion of this constituent of human experience in the social phenomena makes them very different from natural phenomena. Therefore, the content of educational phenomena have to be viewed with this perspective, which has direct implications for deciding the suitability and appropriateness of the mode of inquiry. The process of experiencing involves the interaction between social environment and the individual. During such interaction, another significant process comes into play, namely, interpretation, through which meanings to different actions or ideas are attached and the experience constructed. It is this meaningful phase arrived at through defining and interpreting that makes the phenomenon a reality. Getting to know the process of interpretation by individuals requires the researcher to develop empathic understanding. It is through this ability that the researcher can reproduce in his mind feelings, motives and thoughts that are behind the actions of others. This requires a researcher to view the other person's behavior from the point of view of that person. To a phenomenologist, the situation under study is essentially unstructured, to which he has to give meanings through symbolic interaction and interpretation. In this process, an individual's own consciousness plays an important role in comprehending the situation. Relevant information, his perceptions of different elements, the situation, and a synthesized view of the situation, are utilized to aim at perceiving symbolically meaningful objects which aid the process of understanding the situation. This demands taking into consideration the reaction of the individual, treating him as a person, and also knowing the perspective he holds, to view different elements of the situation for creating symbolically meaningful structures. Processing the situational data thus obtained leads to a gradual comprehension of it in the total context of the experiencer. In fact, this emphasis on experience and thus on experiencer's feelings and motives, makes objectification of data rather difficult and also unnecessary, since some relevant aspects of it are likely to be lost in the attempt of objectifying. It necessitates identifying and discerning the inner world of the individuals for understanding any phenomenon in the social and educational environment. 39. Perspective of knowledge. The essential structure of social phenomenon, which involves social organization, social relationships, belief systems, value orientations, the resultant interactional patterns, refers to those elements which make the phenomenon. Individuals' experience is an integral part of these elements. Also, the whole phenomenon is temporal and contextual. Any description of a social phenomenon made at a time, and in a given context of the larger social system, cannot be considered valid across varied conditions along the time dimension. Thus, the outcomes of pursuits of research with this perspective cannot be taken for generalizations in the form of context-free or universal explanations. Moreover, it necessitates the need of reconstructing continuously what has been already studied, understood and described adequately. This feature of knowledge generation regarding social phenomena may throw light on the nature of knowledge and its structure in social sciences, and makes it distinct from the body of knowledge in natural sciences. Ethnomethodology, like phenomenology, it is concerned with the world of everyday life. In the words of its proponent, Harold Garfinkel, it sets out to treat practical activities, practical circumstances, and practical sociological reasonings as topics of empirical study, and by paying to the most commonplace activities of daily life the attention usually accorded extraordinary events, seeks to learn about them as phenomena in their own right. He maintains that the students of a social world must doubt the reality of that world. And that in failing to view human behavior more skeptically, social scientists have created an ordered social reality that bears little relationship to the real thing. Ethnomethodology, thus, is concerned with how people make sense of their everyday world. More especially, it is directed at the mechanisms by which participants achieve and sustain interaction in a social encounter, the assumptions they make, the conventions they utilize, and the practices they adopt. Ethnomethodology, then, seeks to understand social accomplishments in their own terms. It is concerned to understand them from within. In identifying the taken for granted assumptions characterizing any social situation and the ways in which the people involved make their activities rationally accountable, ethnomethodologists use notions like indexicality and reflexivity. The former refers to the ways in which actions and statements are related to the social contexts producing them, while the latter refers to the way in which all accounts of social settings, descriptions, analyses, criticisms, etc., and the social settings occasioning them are mutually interdependent. The notion of symbolic interactionism essentially derives from the work of G. H. Mead. The noted researchers such as Blumer, Hughes, Becker and Goffman were subsequently associated with this school of thought. It is possible to identify the following three postulates of this viewpoint. First, human beings act towards things on the basis of the meanings they have for them. Humans inhabit two different worlds, the natural world wherein they are organisms of drives and instincts and where the external world exists independently of them, and the social world where the existence of symbols, like language, enables them to give meaning to objects. This attribution of meanings, this interpreting, is what makes them distinctively human and social. Interactionists therefore focus on the world of subjective meanings in the symbols by which they are produced and represented. This means not making any prior assumptions about what is going on in an institution, and taking seriously, indeed giving priority to, inmates' own accounts. Thus, if pupils appear preoccupied for too much of the time, being bored, having a laugh, etc., the interactionist is keen to explore the properties and dimensions of these processes. Second, this attribution of meaning to objects through symbols is a continuous process. Action is not simply a consequence of psychological attributes such as drives, attitudes, or personalities, or determined by external social facts such as social structure or roles, but results from a continuous process of meaning attribution which is always emerging in a state of flux and subject to change. The individual constructs, modifies, pieces together, weighs up the pros and cons and bargains. Third, this process takes place in a social context. Individuals align their actions to knowledge generation, those of others. They do this by taking the role of the other, by making indications to historical perspective one for themselves about others, likely responses. They construct how others wish or might act in certain circumstances, and how they themselves might act. They might try to manage the impressions others have of them, put on a performance, try to influence others' definition of the situation. Instead of focusing on the individual and his or her personality characteristics, or on how the social structure or social situation causes individual behavior, symbolic interactionists direct their attention at the nature of interaction, the dynamic activities taking place between people. In focusing on the interaction itself as on need of study, the symbolic interactionist creates a more active image of the human being and rejects the image of the passive, determined organism. Individuals interact. Societies are made up of interacting individuals. People are constantly undergoing change in interaction and society is changing through interaction. Interaction implies human beings acting in relation to each other, taking each other into account, acting, perceiving, interpreting, acting in relation to each other, acting again. Hence, a more dynamic and active human being emerges rather than an actor merely responding to others. A critical overview of the approaches. For the purpose of this overview, we term the phenomenological, ethnomethodological and symbolic interactionist perspectives commonly as the phenomenological perspective or approach and make the following observations. 1. The way in which reality is perceived in social situations. Education included with the phenomenological perspective is an artifact, a construction of all the participants of a social situation which, however permanent it may appear to be, may be redefined and, therefore, changed. It is assumed that the human mind has an inherent capacity to define reality and interpret it and therefore, understand and describe it with related reference and contexts in which it operates. If it is further assumed, which many researchers do, that the whole process of defining reality, in its due context can be examined by another technical and willing person, and assuming still further that the two could have identical or similar orientations in perceiving reality, they are likely to arrive at similar conclusions. The strength of the argument lies in that even if they do not arrive at similar conclusions, this suggests some way to judge the validity of the approach. 2. If the position of the phenomenological perspective and the contribution of this approach to the process of knowledge generation are examined, one notices some ambiguity as an alternative approach to what positivists have suggested. The emphasis on the involvement of the observer and his perceptions leaves the whole process of research and its outcomes transitory. 3. The process through which the individual observer may form his perceptions, and even define the reality and understand it, leaves scope for giving emphasis up to some degree, to certain views or feelings and ideals that may be dear to him. In fact, this is an essential feature of the phenomenological approaches. This may allow not only the scope for utilization of ideas and concepts in defining and understanding in a detached manner but may also get reflected in the very understanding and description of the reality. This can easily happen when it comes to educational research, which has implications for decision-making in various ways and social action. For instance, how equality of opportunity is defined and described in a social context cannot be free from one's views about certain matters which are of paramount importance socially and can lead to very varied conclusions depending upon how he utilizes his views for fixing the social parameters and develops the logical process to define it. At times, it may even run the risk of giving ventilation to the researcher's slanted views even if he is a 4-1 perspective of knowledge man of integrity, because the cognitive process in him is not free from what he holds about a social situation and how he thinks others do about the same situation. 4. The foregoing observations about phenomenological approaches in general highlight mainly 2 points. 1. These approaches emerge mainly as a strong reaction to the positivist approach of using the paradigm of natural sciences in social sciences. There is a powerful appeal in their argumentation in discarding the positivist scientific method as inadequate and inappropriate to understand social phenomenon. While phenomenologists can be legitimately credited with highlighting some very essential aspects regarding reality and the process of describing it, a very perceptive mind in a researcher may easily find the points at which they are ambiguous, vague and less convincing as far as the adequacy of the approach to contribute to the process of knowledge generation is concerned. 2. The approaches advocated by the positivists and phenomenologists are based on very conflicting premises, and no doubt, each one holds some promise in the pursuit of knowledge generation. However, their inadequacies should suggest the scope for further thinking and continued search for new paradigms or modified ones to serve as more adequate tools of research. Check your progress notes. A. Space is given below for writing your answers. B. Compare your answers with those given at the end of the unit. 1. What is positivistic paradigm? 2. List the limitations of the positivistic paradigm. 3.4 Emergence of field methods. To look into the emergence of field methods, we first start with the question: how can knowledge of the ways in which children learn and the means by which schools achieve their goals be verified, built upon and extended? This is a central question for educational research. The problem of verification and cumulation of educational knowledge has been implicit in our discussion of the nature of educational inquiry in the foregoing sections. There, we have outlined 2 broad approaches to educational research. The first, based on the scientific positivistic paradigm, rests on the creation of theoretical frameworks that can be tested by experimentation, replication and refinement. Against this scientific, experimental approach, we have outlined an alternative perspective which has been described as interpretive and subjective, a focus we hasten to add that should be seen as complementing rather than competing with the experimental stance. In this section, our presentation emphasizes the interpretive, subjective dimensions of educational phenomena that are best explored by case study method, projective technique and anecdotal records method. Emergence of these methods, which may be considered as field methods, is, thus, a knowledge generation fall out of the acceptance of interpretive approaches in social science research. Since historical perspective 11, the scope of controlled experiment is very limited in social sciences. The use of natural experimentation or field methods is the most reasonable way out. Under these methods, the researcher has to make a field study or survey in order to collect research materials or data. The phenomenon is empirically studied and examined, and the conclusion is finally arrived at regarding the cause and effect of the phenomenon. OBV, see, all these methods are based on observation. Consequently, field method is a somewhat open-ended term that concerns not only techniques but also methodology and research procedure. The various elements involved might be defined as follows. I. General methodology concerns the systematic and logical study of the general principles guiding an investigation. Research strategy or research procedure refers to the way a particular investigation is designed and carried out. Research technique is a particular fact-finding manipulative operation that is used to yield social data. In these three distinct aspects of field method are brought together in the research process as they are intertwined with each other in the course of any social investigation. Field method, I, is not an exclusive method in the same sense as, say, experimentation is. Field methods are more like an umbrella of activities beneath which any technique of research may be used for gaining the desired information regarding the investigation. I 3.4.1 Case study method. Case study can be defined as an in-depth study which is concerned with pertinent aspects of a particular unit or situation. The unit under study may be an individual, a social institution or an agency such as a family, a library, a school, a college, or a rural village, etc. The case to be studied may be some phase of the life history of the unit of attention, or it may represent the entire life history or total functioning of the individual one unit. Thus, the case study method involves the collection and recording of data about a case. The collection of data on site is termed as fieldwork, and it involves A. Generally, participant or non-participant observation and interviewing. B. Probably, the collection of documentary evidence and descriptive data, and even the administration of tests or questionnaires. And C. Possibly, the use of photography, motion pictures or videotape recording. Thus, whatever the problem or the approach, at the heart of every case study lies a method of observation, participant or non-participant. In participant observation, observers engage in the very activities they set out to observe. Often their cover is so complete that as far as the other participants are concerned, they are simply one of the group. To have better insight into the life of a gang of